Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We are going to have a great show. We are going to be speaking with Ed Malkowski about his new book, The Return of the Golden Age. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com, where you can learn about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, psychic readings, and energy medicine sessions. And so please do visit SoulHealer.com, drop me an email, give me a call, set up a time for a consultation, because it's a new year, and you might as well get it off to a good start. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. You know, before the show, we were talking about don't talk fast, and here I go, like going a mile a minute. So let me take a breath and slow down. Brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Please do sign up for our newsletter on justenergyradio.com or visit Just Energy Radio on YouTube, where you can see or listen to the shows. I mean, you can kind of see them, but not. And if you do check out the shows there, please subscribe to our channel. I also have a secondary channel, which is Science and Spirit Meet, which has all of the videos that I have been producing. And I just released one this week about genetic engineering in antiquity. It's a very interesting topic, you know, and it looks at agriculture and the domestication of plants. And even though that sounds really like it might be kind of boring and mundane, it's really fascinating if you start looking at what happened to the genetic makeup of early plants. I just like to say it was a miracle or not. You decide. Anyway, that's Science and Spirit Meet on YouTube. They're also posted on the Just Energy Radio channel as well. Please do watch them. I would appreciate it. Let's see. I think that's all the announcements I have for right now. So let me tell you a little bit about Ed and get him on the air. Ed Malkowski has a lifelong interest in ancient history with a special interest in the rise of civilization, philosophy, and the development of ancient religious beliefs. With the opinion that ancient biblical stories in Genesis were based on historical events during the late 1900s, he began investigating the possible archaeological and historical evidence that inspired the earliest mythologies found in the biblical Genesis. Malkowski now explains ancient history in the light of today's economic reality in The Return of the Golden Age, ancient history and the key to our collective future. So please welcome Ed Malkowski. Hey, Ed, how are you?
I'm fine, Rita. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I think it's been about 4 years since we've last talked, and I've always
It has been forever.
Yeah, it was 2010 when my last book came out.
Well, actually, I can tell you just exactly when. It was June 25th of 2010.
Yeah, that's pretty close to 4 years.
You need to write more. That's just it.
I try very hard to write more. I really do, but some of the topics that I want to write about are kind of intense mentally, and it takes quite some time to research. So I'm hoping to do more like a book a year from here on out if I work hard at it.
Well, but I appreciate that. There are some people that write 2, 3, 4 books a year, which I don't even know how they do it. Because I know for me, it takes me a couple of years of research before I actually sit in front of the computer and start thinking about writing. And then once I start, there's still research filling in gaps and holes in my other research, which is just kind of like the primer for the outline of what I'm going to write.
I agree. And, we also have lives, I'm married, have a wife, I've got 3 young kids, and my mom's still alive. So there's a lot of other things to do besides write. And, typically, I think Graham Hancock had said this. I was listening to him on an interview on the show, and I believe he said if he could write 4 pages a day, that was good. And that's about right. I can kick out, if I get on a roll, I can kick out about 3 and 4 pages a day. Sometimes, I only do a paragraph a day because it's not there or something else is happening. So we'll try harder to write more books.
Well, if it's quantity and let go of quality, I would rather not have you on so much and get the good quality of research that you do provide in your books. I mean, I really appreciate people that take the time to dig deep.
That's what I'm doing. And actually, just while we're on that subject of digging deep, my publisher was absolutely thrilled with Return of the Golden Age. Absolutely thrilled. And I'm writing a follow-up sequel to it right now. I've almost got the first draft done because actually I've been working on it for about 6 months. So there's going to be some spooky stuff in the future coming out of me.
Ooh, we like spooky stuff here.
Yeah, it's just kind of spooky. My oldest son Joe is actually working on the project with me a little bit, and tentatively I'm calling it Cosmic Conspiracy: The Origins and History of Evil.
Origin and history of
evil.
Ooh, I like it. In a bad kind of spooky way.
Yeah, but actually, it's in a very subtle way. The evil I'm talking about. I'm getting away with it. I want to talk about my next book. But
but it's interesting. So just, come on, tease us. We'll have everybody send you good writing mojo energy.
Okay. The evil that I'm talking about is very subtle, and it actually does apply to Return of the Golden Age, because I do address it there in a roundabout way, but I don't really get into it. Throughout all of civilization, going back 5,000 years, maybe even longer, there's one overarching pattern in history, and that is the domination of land and people. And what's very interesting from a philosophical and religious point of view is that the point of origin of this domination is directed at the female, the woman. And this is where we look at Genesis chapter 2, where Eve gets all the blame for everything. Now that flows through into culture, into the psyche, into the minds of the people. And if you look at history, it's absolutely true. Women have been dominated as subjects, and even slavery. There's even slavery now today with women. But that slavery has been in existence for a long time. And if you know your history, and it's taught in public schools, women didn't even have the right to vote until 1920, just in the past 100 years. So my next book, I'm trying to find out what is the source of this domination mentality. Where did it come from? And I'm going into a cosmic arena for it. That's where I've traced the source back to. It exists in a non-local world of the mind, where I put forth the hypothesis that there are entities out there in the non-local world, the spirit world, that do have influence and power. So that's where that's going.
Well, it sounds like we're both kind of on a similar track, because my new book, which I've just barely, I've done a bunch of research, and now I'm moving into sort of getting ready to start writing on it, is going to be looking at traditions that ancient cultures have that we've brought into the present time, or things that, we have record of, and why did they start doing it in the first place?
Exactly.
Like
that's
elongated heads.
Right.
Why do that? I don't know.
Oh, hey, you just mentioned a piece of my next book that I'll give you a little tidbit on, okay? The elongated head, all right? That's, technically speaking, the lichocephalic skull, okay? That's very rare today. It's only like in maybe 5% of the population, and I believe it's North Africa that contains those type of skulls. My oldest son was a neuroscience PhD student until he had to have 3 back surgeries. And we've been talking about that topic. And what he comes up with is that part of the brain in the back, okay, it was long because that part of the brain is where you have telepathic powers, okay? This comes from MRI studies he has done and other people have done at the university level. So what we're kind of hypothesizing here and speculating about is, and this is a fact, that all prehistoric people, or most prehistoric people, had oblong skulls. But the whole idea we're coming up with here is that the initial state of man prior to 12,000 years ago is that the people were actually more telepathic than we are. And they were hooked into each other in, kind of a human conscious point of view, but they were also more attuned to the soul, the spirit of the planet. And this is how they could see into reality and dig out laws of physics to make their civilization and to create ancient Egypt.
But that even ties in with this book about the Golden Age, or the return of the Golden Age, because wasn't that the period when there was this Golden Age, going back that far in time?
That's correct.
And I'm just going to throw back out at you, you find this more in Native American cosmology, where they talk about, well, we could communicate with the animals, and then things changed.
Exactly.
And we couldn't.
Exactly. Good stuff.
So, it is good stuff. People are like, why do you read this stuff? It's like, because it's fascinating. To me,
it is.
I don't know.
Well, see, that's a curiosity I think everyone has. I think that's a trait of human nature. Just by our very nature, we're curious. We want to find some type of meaning or purpose in our lives. We want to know where we came from, what we are doing, and where are we going. And, part of the Golden Age book and my upcoming book is that there is a system that's been put over us to kind of hypnotize us into good consumers and good workers, and that takes away from that free thought. It takes away from the creative spirit. It takes away the nature of a human being the way we're supposed to be. And some of us, have broken through. To kind of dovetail that into the return of the Golden Age, we're living in very strange times right now. The youth seem to be looking for something. Even within the Christian community, the youth are questioning Christian doctrine And they're actually getting away from the idea of eternal damnation and moving into a very Gnostic direction. There's a movement out there among the youth. I don't know if any of your listeners have heard of Rob Bell, but for the past 15, 20 years, there's been this movement called the Emergent Church, or the Emerging Church. And they're really moving back to Gnostic ideas, where the whole idea of divinity is personal and within you. And then you got people like Bart Ehrman. He's a professor of religious studies, and I believe it's Chapel Hill, in North Carolina or South Carolina. He's been a very successful writer in his research. He's probably got, 20 or 30 books out there. Anyway, he has actually pretty much put the evidence forth that 17 centuries ago, the scribes of the Orthodoxy, the Christian Orthodoxy, actually changed parts of the Scripture to reflect more what they believed than what was actually written there. So, this is all new stuff. 40 years ago, I was 13 years old, and it's quite a while ago, but I do remember because my father loved books, and every time we went to a shopping mall, we had to go to a bookstore. And so I followed him to bookstores. And I do remember the books that we looked at back then, and looking at all kinds of books. And 40 years ago, there were very few spirituality books on the market, very few paranormal books on the market. They just didn't exist. And in the past 20, 30 years, these books are now commonplace. They're all over the net. You can get them on Amazon. You walk into Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble is going to have their own spirituality and New Age section, So we're talking about a mass event here. It's cultural. It's involving humanity. Because when you start looking at the movies and television shows, again, this is in the past 40 years, there's a complete change in what people want to view, both in TV and in film. Just going back to the 70s when I was a teenager, there was one show that was paranormal related. It was called The Sixth Sense. With Gary Collins.
I love that show. That's the reason. That was one of the reasons that show and The Amazing Kreskin is why I do what I do. No lie.
That's very cool. But that was the only show. And then nothing happened for a long time. But slowly, you get into the late 80s, especially the early 90s, you start having these shows about paranormal. The X-Files, which I was a big fan of. The X-Files kind of reflected the cultural attitude of the time about conspiracy, aliens, weird things, ghosts, hauntings. And the X-Files, of course, as we all know, was a huge success. And since the X-Files ended in, I believe, 2001 or thereabouts, there's been a flood of movies come out that have to do with the paranormal and what is reality. The Matrix was a mind blower. But what's really interesting is long before The Matrix was released in '99, there was a film going back to 1998. It was a John Carpenter film called They Live. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, They Live is an awesome film because it actually captures what's going on today. The short synopsis of the film is there's a young man played by Rowdy Roddy Piper, the wrestler. His name is Nada, and he's a drifter, and he goes to L.A. looking for work, and he stumbles on these sunglasses that make you see reality as it really is. And most of the people are normal. Every once in a while, they'll come across an alien, and that really freaks him out. When he looks at the signs, the large billboard advertising signs that are on the streets and everywhere, they say stuff like, sleep, stay asleep, obey, money is your God, be good, work hard. And, the whole movie is about Nada, the main character, going to their base of broadcasting, and they're broadcasting this frequency to hypnotize people. And, of course, he blows up the base at the end, and then, humanity gets to see the aliens as they really are. That show, so long ago in 1988, I would love to talk to John Carpenter about this, but it seems to me he was taking society the way it really is and spinning it into a sci-fi movie to get a message across. And since then, just recently, Clint Eastwood does wonderful movies. One of his most recent movies is one called Hereafter, where Matt Damon plays a guy that's clairvoyant, and he's been clairvoyant since he was a little boy because he died 3 times and had near-death experiences. Well, this whole movie is about him and several other people where the cosmos is directing things. And Matt Damon and this French lady who had a near-death experience, they get to meet up at the end. And so there's this cosmic love drama going on. But yeah, society has changed drastically. We have a paranoid government now. So we have to ask the question, and I ask the question, and that's what a lot of the book is about, why are things like this? That's what I want to know.
But it doesn't seem like our government, all right, they're more paranoid now, but they were paranoid for a long time. I mean, the whole Cold War was based on paranoia, and it just seems like it becomes more entrenched and less focused on out there. And the eyes have turned in here, looking at the people of the United States versus, other countries.
Right. There's a good reason for that.
Okay.
In my book, the first chapter in Golden Age is about the New World Order, and that's a personal story to me, actually, because I graduated high school in 1979, and growing up in Central Illinois, I had a lot of friends whose parents were farmers, and excuse me. 2 years out of high school, one of my good friends, who actually is deceased now, he died 3 years ago. I was home for Christmas on college break in December 1981. And, of course, this is back then. You had friends, you got together, you partied, went to people's houses and stuff and hung out. And he said, "Ed, you've got to listen to this tape." And I said, "Okay." Well, what this tape was, this retired Air Force colonel named J.C. Lewis out of Oklahoma had become a farmer after retiring from the Air Force. And a lot of changes were happening in agriculture in the 1970s. Small farms were going bankrupt, and the whole agricultural industry was consolidating. He wasn't very happy about what's going on because Washington really wasn't giving him any help. So he went to Washington to get his own answers. And his own answers he turned into a lecture and began lecturing on a circuit in farm country. And basically what he was saying was that why all these farms are disappearing is because the government and the real power behind the government, the corporations, are consolidating things and consolidating the industry with the idea of creating a loosely knit world government. This was back in 1981. Okay? Well, that really tripped my trigger. It really got me going. And at the time, I was becoming a junior in college at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I was a business student, and I loved it. I loved economics, and I took 4 years of economics actually, and I was taking European economics that semester, and I asked my professor, Professor Neal. We all had to do term papers. Back then, you had to write papers all the time, and which I actually loved. But I pulled him aside after class one day and asked him if I could do a paper on the Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations, because these are the two organizations that J.C. Lewis in his lecture was pointing at as the imperial brain trust behind the government and the corporations. And he looked at me and said, "You mean kind of a spooky shadow thing?" And I kind of said, "Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I want to investigate it." And he said, "Well, I think there's a lot of better other subjects to write about." Obviously, he was telling me, "Dude, don't waste your time on this. You need to be writing on something else." So I did my term paper on something else and kind of forgot about it. Then a whole decade goes by, and we're involved in the first Gulf War, and the Gulf War is over, and President George H.W. Bush, I believe it was in a State of the Union address that he did this. It's the famous New World Order speech, where for the first time you have a president actually standing up and saying to the entire country, "We are now seeing the emergence of a new world order." I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not quoting him. "We are now seeing a new world order where we can have law and order and peace in the entire world." So that was in 91. That really piqued my ears up, and really didn't get back on track with it until probably about a year ago. So something is going on here, and this whole New World Order, okay, is a golden age. Now, the important part, the New World Order being a golden age, it's all about perception. Okay, the way society is structured today really hasn't changed all that much in 5,000 years. But what's different today is we have a much larger population, and we have instant mass communication for the people. The internet has really changed everything. This is why I think you see the government becoming a little bit more paranoid. Because prior to the invention of the internet, all you had was radio and TV. And radio and TV was controlled by very large corporations. Here you go with another film that was very exposing. I believe it was 1977 or 78. It was called Network News. Do you remember that movie?
No.
Oh, it was a very, very famous movie. It was about an anchorman that flipped out on camera. And Ned Beatty plays one of the main characters, and he sets this anchorman down, and he tells him the truth. There are no more countries. There's no America. There's no Saudi Arabia. There's no Britain. There's only corporations and money. He goes on with his speech, but he was, the whole movie was explaining that, folks, the world is changing in a really big way, and it's happening. But society always lags behind these discoveries that people announce, either in film or in movie or in literature. And it's like taking 20, 25 years for society to catch up with that. And the internet has played a very big role in that. Because now, well, just like you, Rita, you have a radio show. 20 years ago, it would be impossible for you to have a radio show because you'd need millions of dollars to have a station, have a production crew, and get everything set up. A lot of people can do it now. There's all kinds of broadcasting going on. Just look at YouTube. You've got probably millions of people broadcasting themselves, making documentaries, putting documentaries on there of all kinds and all forms. So, getting back to my original line of thought, where I was talking about the golden age and perception, is the leaders of our countries, the leaders of these corporations, they are planning on a golden age.
But I just, from their perspective, because I don't see how it would be from our perspective.
Exactly the point. Okay. In 1989, this was a year and a half, 2 years before the Soviet Union dissolved itself, Mikhail Gorbachev wrote a book, and for just to remind everyone, Mikhail Gorbachev was the last president of the Soviet Union, and he was there when it disbanded. He wrote a book called Perestroika in 1989, and in the very last chapter of that book, he actually says, I believe the United States and the USSR can forge a golden age for themselves as well as for the world. So our leaders have been thinking about this for quite some time. Now, the problem is their perception. I don't think that they care so much about the people. The golden age is actually for them.
It goes right up there with the Georgia Stonehenge thing, get rid of everybody and then we can just rule the world kind of mentality. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
Well, right. That's where you have Agenda 21 trying to control population. We see population is a big problem.
Huge problem.
It's a huge problem. Because as a business student, I know a lot about finance, economics, the general business arena, and just in our lifetimes, technology and computer science has drastically reduced the number of people required to work. The creation of robotics in factories has reduced the number of people needed. Okay. This is good for corporations because it cuts out the human factor. It cuts out payroll. It cuts out healthcare costs. It cuts out a lot of things, which is good for them. Just for example, I had a number of accounting classes when I was in school, and a friend of mine that I worked with, who was 10 years older than me, he was also an accountant. He graduated college in 1969 and became an accountant. He said the difference is drastic. Back when he graduated college, for example, he worked for a CPA firm. In the CPA firm, you would have 50 employees. Most of those employees were bookkeepers. Well, after the computer revolution, that same CPA firm didn't need 50 employees. They only needed 10. So, looking at this overarching pattern of using technology to leverage business and get rid of the human costs, you have corporations growing and using technology requiring fewer people. But at the same time, you've got a growing population. So you have more and more people unemployed, more and more people needing government assistance. It's a really big problem. And, there's talk out there on different websites and different things that some people, they think the system's going to crash pretty soon.
You still there?
So, yeah,
I thought the system crashed. I was like, oh
no. No. I was talking for a long time and I had to have a little sip of water.
Well, and I'm just going to throw in, it's like, I feel like that thought has been there for a long time, that Social Security is going to fall apart, or that Medicaid is going to fall apart, or all these social services are going to fall apart, but where things are moving now, it's like I think people's impatience with the system might become a bigger issue.
What really aggravates me the most is that government always gets the blame. And unfortunately, that is not true. The government really is by the people and for the people and want the best for the people. Now, I know everyone's getting skeptical out there.
I know. I'm just like, wait a minute, where's the tomatoes and the lettuce heads?
That can't be true. People are throwing garbage at me. Let me explain a minute, okay? There are two different segments of the society we live in. There's the public sector, which is where you have your government and your public life. Everyone has a public life. You do, I do, we all do. That public life, okay, is protected by the Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution, okay? Now, you've heard of the private sector, correct? The private sector is all about private property, the ownership rights, and what you can do with that, all right? Corporations and businesses exist in the private sector, not the public sector. Corporations and businesses are not bound, I repeat, they are not bound by the Constitution or the Bill of Rights when it comes to employees. They can fire you for any reason they want to, and you can't do a thing about it. Just for example, let's take this very, very extraordinarily large department store that has stores throughout the world. Okay. One of their policies is boyfriends and girlfriends cannot work together. Okay? So let's say that, I'm young and I'm employed by the store, and I meet this beautiful young lady, and she digs me too. Okay? So, we're making eyes at each other, and we're friendly with each other. Our supervisor catches wind of it and fires us because we're boyfriend and girlfriend. There's no rights. Okay? Now, what the corporations have done over a long period of time, and this is why it's so hard to see, because it's happened gradually over a very long period of time. Here I'm talking the past 100 years, okay? Probably more effectively in the past 30 or 40 years. But what the corporations have been able to do, okay, is they've been able to leverage their wealth and power over the government. So the government is actually at the mercy of these large funding corporations. This is why it's become a joke in our presidential elections that whoever raises the most money gets to be president. That the government is not at fault.
But if it's for the people and by the people, I mean, it sounds like you're saying two different things, because if the governments are controlling the politicians, then it's really for the corporation by the corporation, and we just kind of fall out on the side.
That's what it has become. Okay? But there are still good people in government. Ron Paul, for one, his son Rand Paul, and there are others. There is a fight going on as we speak, and has been going on for the last decade. All right, so there's a power struggle going on, and the government really isn't the problem. Okay, because it's a simple fact. If all of us people in this country wake up and stand up, we can fire all of our representatives and senators and send all new people to Congress. And if they don't do what we want to do, we can fire them and put new people in. Congress makes the laws, not the president, not the corporations, okay? How corporations control things is through economic power, okay? And what I mean by that is...
But that's the operative word, is control, too.
Exactly. It's to be unemployed and have no job, no income, and shortly no place to live. There's no more greater fear than that. Okay? And that's what's used against the people. Every time there's an election, it's all about jobs. It's all about the economy. The truth of the matter is that the government cannot really affect the economy. It's not the role of the government. It's the role of business and commerce to affect the economy. And they're twisting it around and making it look like it's all government's fault. And from an economic point of view, that's just not true. It can't be true. So there's a lot of cloak and dagger going on with the people's minds, and it's all done through the TV.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I still have a hard time putting an equal that, you know, it's not the government. I mean, let me separate it in a different way. There are the policies and the procedures and laws that have been enacted that we're supposed to follow, or the guidelines, you know, which are inanimate. And then there are the people enforcing that or making sure those things happen. And it just seems like they just, you know, either close their eyes or push things through, you know, for whatever the corporations want. You know, so the policies and procedures aren't at fault, but then there are all those, all right, this isn't coming out of my mouth, but all those crooks that are, you know, on the take or getting some kind of benefit out the back door.
Well, this is why we see the big struggle between the Democrats and the Republicans, between conservatism and liberalism. Okay, this struggle about economics is manifesting itself through liberalism and the Democratic Party. They want more things for people. They want people to have health care, to have dental care. You know, they want people to survive and live. Where on the other extreme, the conservative people, they say, screw everything. You know, we should have complete freedom to run our companies. Okay? So that's in that manner is where I see this great big tug of war going on. And government is actually in the middle of it. You know, I'm not completely exonerating government. I'm just saying that government is not the root cause. And actually, George Washington himself said a long time ago that political parties are bad, and they should not be allowed in government, but yet they are.
Okay, not sure where to go with that one, but
well, it's.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's you know, because it's about this golden age, and so in comparison to this golden age that was experienced in antiquity, what was that period like? I mean, what is this ideal that they are looking to, you know, and I'm going to put this in quotation marks, achieve here on Earth now?
Well, that's a really hairy question.
Well, not what they're trying to achieve, but, you know, what was going on back then that we can say, oh, yeah, that was a good time kind of thing.
Well, all we have to go by is our mythologies. And this is recorded in Greek mythology. It's recorded in Sumerian mythology. It's recorded in Hindu mythology. It's also recorded in Egyptian mythology. And it's even recorded in Hebrew mythology, in the Bible. All mythology agrees that the first memories of humanity, of mankind, was that we lived on a paradise planet. There was peace, there was abundance, there was no fear, there was no war. Everyone got along. Now, to the exact details, we really don't have any details of what that life was like, because that is the first memory of humanity that was actually written down and captured as literature. Now, what's very interesting, okay, is the second memory of humanity. And again, this is about mythology. The second memory is the death of gods, catastrophe, disaster. And again, It's captured in every single culture that goes back that far. They're talking about a great destruction. Okay? And looking at history moving forward, you have the Golden Age, then you have global catastrophe, then you have the building of a new civilization. Okay? And that civilization is predicated upon a hierarchical structure to society, the appearance of the God King, okay, and the nobility, and everyone else being workers. Well, I hypothesize that the Golden Age, the Paradise Planet we did live on, was destroyed by a natural catastrophe, and that the survivors were highly traumatized by what happened. Because they had a paradise planet that they lived in, all of a sudden this great catastrophe comes, decimates the planet, kills most of the people, and the survivors inherit the planet of desolation. And they have to figure out a way to survive. This is where the advent of agriculture comes in around 9,000, 10,000 BC. We had to start farming. We had to start growing our own food because the planet was pretty much destroyed. The climate was changing. We no longer had the fruit trees and the vegetables that we once had. We had to do it ourselves. This created a psychic problem in the mind. Okay, it was basically, the way I see it, the creation of ego, the creation of I am the king, I am the boss. You people need to rally around me, follow me, so we can all get along. And if you look at history at this overarching pattern, that's exactly what you see. Because the first kingdom is Sumer, and their civilization is all about war. You got city-state fighting city-state. For 1,000 years, you have just war after war after war. And then around 3000 BC, you have the emergence of Sumer. And then a little bit later, there's more war in between. And then a little bit later, around 2000 BC, you have the first empire, the Akkadian Empire. And then you have a big string of empires. You go from Akkad to the Babylonians, to the Persians, to the Greeks, and then to the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire kind of shifts gears, okay? It changes from a very secular-based empire into a religious empire. And that takes us all the way up to the 15th and 16th centuries, where people started to rebel against that. And then you have the creation of science. But that authority, that domination authority, just changes its modus operandi. And instead of being a religious domination, okay, it changes its focus and moves into commerce and becomes a domination of people through wealth and through business. And this brings us all the way up to right now. So there's your pattern right there. And what I see happening is this loss of the Golden Age, okay, in history ever since, individual people want to recreate this Golden Age. And they do it for themselves. It's a very selfish thing. They want their little kingdom for them to be a Golden Age. And the whole thing just gets larger and larger and larger as history moves along until we get to now. Which now, if you look at it pragmatically, if you look at it for what it really is, we have an Anglo-Saxon economic empire that controls 4 of the 6 habitable continents on the planet. Control North America, South America, Europe, and Australia. Okay, this is the big pattern of history. And when I first started seeing this, it kind of scared me. I was like, what in the world's going on here?
Well, you were talking about all TV shows and movies. Did you get a chance to watch, and I was told I'm not supposed to talk bad about stuff on air, but I don't care. The history, Mankind, History of All of Us. It was a series on TV.
No, actually, I did not see that. I'm sorry. But you can tell me about it a little bit.
Well, you really didn't miss anything because it was really mankind, the history of Anglo-Saxon white people in America, and we'll throw in a couple of Brits, and really that's about it.
Oh,
but,
no, that's
it was just like, I talked to the TV. I was watching it with my husband, and we talked to the TV a lot because it was like, who made this up, and whose history is this? And really, it was. No, Ed, if you want to make a lot of popcorn, and invite your friends over, and then have a discussion afterwards, and a good laugh, because it was it was pretty funny, in my opinion. From a propaganda point of view, from a totally propaganda point of view.
Right, and I understand your use of the word propaganda, and in one sense, I do agree with it. But to look at the world from the official perspective of those historians of an academic venue, that's the way they actually really see it. And I understand where the problem
it wasn't even close. I mean, they were like, Fred over here invented trade, and he used to take this tin, I don't know, something from Iran, and he would take his little cart and wheel it down to Egypt, and they could make bronze. Is that how you make bronze? With tin and copper? Anyway, but it was Fred that invented trade, in 2500 BC. And I'm looking at the TV going, what about the ochre that they found in all these places that came out of Africa, or the shells that they found in Siberia? It's like, no, there wasn't any trade back then. It was Fred. It was Fred.
I read an article. I read an article. This was in one of my earlier books. It was in the spiritual technology of ancient Egypt. I was doing some work in prehistory, and I came across a young archaeologist who was studying trade in prehistoric times. Here I'm talking 20,000 BC, 30,000 BC, and he was mapping out all these trade routes for prehistoric men. So no, yeah, you're right. Trade has existed as long as humans have existed. Just like philosophy has existed as long as humans have existed. That's our nature. We're social creatures. We think, we reason, we find meaning, and we trade goods. So yeah, I mean, if the show was really saying that, it's kind of ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was that, and then Amber, who lived in the Fertile Crescent, invented agriculture. All right, I've changed the name. They gave somebody other name.
Right.
But I'm like, really? I mean, that was just, that was my attitude. They said that, and I'm like, really? Oh, it was Amber. And then Fred did
Amber
the trade. Yeah, it's all good. And then Tiffany, she started. It's like, please. No, you have to watch it, Ed, because you'll laugh. It was so much misinformation. Yeah,
well,
lots of popcorn, maybe a few drinks.
Well, it's this has been a lifelong quest of mine. This goes all the way back to the mid '70s, '77, when I was around 16 years old. I really had a hard time believing the history that I was told. Now, I really didn't know anything. I really hadn't done any studies, but I've always loved history. Back when I was a little boy, this is going back into between 1965 and 1970, when I was between 5 and 10 years old. I had this fascination about World War II. Now, it could be the possibility that, in the 60s, World War II movies and literature was still big. But my dad was bringing me home these weekly magazines. It was The History of the Second World War by Marshall Cavendish. And I just became fascinated with history because what my dad was bringing home, all these magazines and articles about what happened during World War II, was not what I was seeing on TV and being taught in grade school. It was kind of different. So, you know, as I got into junior high and college, and then college, I kind of skipped high school a little bit. You know how that goes. But as I got into college, I started looking at history, and I had a very cool history teacher. Her name was Mary Sargent. She was kind of an ex-hippie, and she taught history. History is all about perspective. So much stuff has happened that there's no way we can know it all. So when you start looking at history, you've got to start talking about perception. And her being female, she was wanting to get across the whole idea of the woman's plight in history. And that kind of changed my mind around. It's like, what's going on here? You know, of course, I had a job and a family and all of that and kept moving forward. But the big breakthrough came in 1993 when John Anthony West aired his NBC television special hosted by Charlton Heston, The Mystery of the Sphinx. This is where Dr. Robert Schoch redates the Sphinx, saying it's much older than 2500 BC. And I watched that program. It was a 2-hour program. And after watching that program, I was like, oh, my God, Dr. Schoch is right. I mean, everything he says makes total sense. So at that point, my mind was off and running.
Well, you know, I had Robert Schoch on the show, and we were having a conversation about the Sphinx and, you know, about how it was much more water prior to 7000 BC, which I have a question about something that you talked about the shift in culture, but I'll make this comment, then I'll ask the question. And I said, well, you know, it would make sense that there was water there versus sand. I go, what engineer in their right mind would build a structure that was below the surface of the prevailing terrain so that someone could go in there every day and sweep out the sand? Water would run off. That sand just fills up the surround. And yeah, I could kind of feel like he had this little light bulb moment. I love when I do that to people. It's like,
that's correct. I spent a month in Egypt in 2007, and I will testify that every ancient site or every ancient ruin site, some of them are better than others, every site that we went to in Lower Egypt, which is the northern part of Egypt, here I'm talking about Abu Rawash, Giza, Saqqara, Abu Ghraib, Abu Sur, okay? It's all associated with water. They have water troughs, water tunnels, water basins, okay? It's built right next to the old Nile River, where the Nile River was at that time. So water was definitely a huge part of their life. So everything agrees.
Mm-hmm. All right, but so let me go back to my little question. You know, so you talked about something changed that brought on the rise of civilization and culture, you know, with agriculture and stuff, you know, and the decline of like the fruits and the plants, you know, the easy vegetation, you know, and I think it's interesting because right around that same time is where we see that huge shift in climate in Africa, where it was a wet or at least savanna environment, although, you know, there was river and a lake running in the middle of it, to what it is now, which is drastic. You know, so do you have any ideas or thoughts on what happened to cause such a dramatic shift in climate?
I sure do. A number of people, a number of professional astronomers and geologists has actually looked into this topic, and have written books about it. Dr. Shock is one. There's another man by the name of Paul LaViolette who wrote a book a number of years ago, Earth Under Fire. And they all kind of say generally the same thing, that the catastrophe that occurred 12,000 years ago was a cosmic catastrophe. The conflagration came from outer space. And my own personal favorite theory on exactly what happened comes out of a book that was published a very long time ago. He was a Russian named Milosevic, I think it was named. I believe it was published in either the late 70s or the early 80s. And there's very, very, very good astronomical evidence for his theory.
Just Energy Radio,
his theory
with your
is
host,
this.
Dr.
12,000 years ago, a star in the Vela system, which is a very nearby constellation, a star in the Vela system went type 2 supernova. And astronomers know this is an absolute fact, and it's dated that old because astronomers can see the large plasma shrapnel moving in different directions away from the Vela system. It's actually visible in X-ray radar. There's academic publications about this. And so what happened is the star goes supernova, and it shoots a planetary-sized ball of plasma. Plasma is very, very hot gas. The plasma is so hot that atoms do not exist in it. All there is free-moving particles of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And we're talking tens of millions of degrees. Well, this planet-sized ball of shrapnel comes moving through our solar system. Now, this very event right here is actually captured in the Greek myth of Phaeton and the Sun's Chariot.
Okay, Ed,
Because,
I need you to
yes.
hold that thought because I'm already overdue to go to a break. And I'm like listening, going, oh, this is really interesting. And it's like, oh, yeah, freak. So hold that thought because I want to hear the myth. So I'm
All
Dr.
right.
Rita Louise. We're here talking to Ed Malkowski about his book, Return to the Golden Age. You need to get it. It's a really good book. But we will be back with Ed after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
Go deep inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may be keeping you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and enlightenment with Meditating on the Kabbalah. Order your copy today at www.soulhealer.com. That's right, that's www.soulhealer.com. Before we get back to the show, I want to thank all of you for tuning into Just Energy Radio this evening. Many of the people I've helped over the years were listeners just like you. If you're at a junction in your life, don't stand alone at this important time. Call me or send me an email. We can set up a private consultation so that you too can experience wholeness in your life. To find out more about the services I offer, visit soulhealer.com. Are you sensitive to energy? Want to explore the world beyond the five senses? Looking for a new career as an alternative healthcare practitioner? Then the Institute of Applied Energetics, Medical Intuition, and Energy Medicine training programs may be right for you. Our comprehensive curriculum provides students with a deep understanding of how to detect, evaluate, and transform the subtle body, as well as techniques for correcting energetic imbalances that may underscore a person's ability to experience radiant health. So if you are sensitive to energy, contact the Institute of Applied Energetics right away. Be a catalyst for changing the way healthcare is done around the world. Visit www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and start your new career today.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We're going to continue our conversation with Ed Malkowski about his book, Return to the Golden Age. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you too can learn to become a medical intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner. And all of this can be done from the comfort of your own home. So please do check out www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, especially if you are sick and tired of what you're doing and are looking for a new career. This will prepare you to go out into the world as a healing arts practitioner. It's what I do. I love it. I have fun all the time. And don't forget, check out the YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio on YouTube, or Science and Spirit Meet. You know, watch my videos, click on them a lot, you know, because they're monetized. So share them with your friends. That's even better. Share them with all your friends. Anyway, Ed, so I hope you remember what myth you were going to go into when we went to the break.
Yes, I do. I was talking about the Greek myth of Phaeton and the chariot of the sun.
Okay.
And I was explaining that myth, which is the whole context of the myth, is set in outer space. It's a celestial myth. And at the very end of the myth, well, the chariot of the sun goes bouncing around our solar system and hitting different planets. That's what the gods actually were planets back in those days. And at the very end of the myth, a portion of fire from the chariot strikes Earth. Okay? And if you start looking at other work that kind of agrees with this, some of the studies, the basic idea is that our planet was hit by a gamma ray burst, okay, which is almost identical. It's not physically identical to, but it has the same effects as this great big giant ball of plasma. What's going to happen is as this ball of plasma comes ricocheting into our solar system, it's going to push dust and debris from the Oort cloud around our solar system into the inner parts of our solar system where the sun is. This is going to cause sun flares because the dust is going to be a fuel for the sun, and then our planet is going to be hit by debris. One of the most fascinating descriptions of this comes from Native American cultures. I can't remember which one. I think it was the Hopi, but don't hold me to that. Anyway, their legend of what happened is that the sky came down and actually touched the ground. So something bad really happened to our planet. There's plenty of evidence out there by archaeologists. Cycles of Catastrophe is another book that comes to mind. It's also done by my publisher. Very, very good book. And this changed our planet in a great big way. And the most fascinating thing about this, and it actually really freaked me out when I first started reading about it, but it's based on the work of a man by the name of David Talbot. And if you haven't had him on your show, you need to get him on your show because he's awesome. He did a documentary back in the mid-'90s called Remembering the End of the World. And he's done a few more documentaries recently, in the last five years or so, called Symbols of an Alien Sky. Anyway, he's looking at the ancient mythologies and looking at their iconography all across the world. And he's trying to understand what these ancients were drawing. They were always drawing like 3 circles within a circle. And one of these would have a star to it. And he started getting into the ancient text and came to the conclusion, rightfully so, that Saturn, Mars, and Venus were orbiting the sun very close to the Earth, and that we could see these planets just like we could see the moon at night. And the catastrophe that happened 12,000 years ago broke up the orbits of the planets into the new orbits that they are in now. Saturn. The textual evidence comes from ancient Sumerian cuneiform texts. It comes in the style of omens. And the way they used the word Shamash. In ancient Sumeria, the word Shamash was initially believed to be that it referred to the sun we know now. But in a closer look to it, professionals that were Assyriologists back in the early part of the 20th century, was actually a big debate over it. And most of those academics were convinced that part of the time, and there's linguistic reasons to believe this, I won't get into exactly what those reasons are, but there was linguistics evidence to believe that at some times they were referring to Shamash as the nighttime sun. And at other times they're referring to Shamash as the daytime sun. One omen in particular that's really kind of spooky is the Sumerians were talking about when Saturn is in the shadow of the moon. How can Saturn be in the shadow of the moon unless it's a nearby object visible to the naked eye? That's really kind of mind-blowing. But Saturn was stationary at our North Pole. And this kind of dovetails into the ancient Egyptian myth of Hathor in the Eye of Ra. As the story goes, Ra, which we believe to be the daytime sun we know now, is actually not true. But originally, Ra was the planet Saturn. And this is a very cool myth because it also explains a lot. It has to do with time. Ra was upset at humanity. So he counseled the gods and decided to do away with humanity. He didn't want to do it himself because he was heartsick that humanity was the way it was. So he sent Hathor as the Eye of Ra to destroy humanity. When Hathor was doing away with humanity, Ra had a change of heart and he wanted it stopped. So he signaled to his priests on Earth, mix blood and beer and something else into this mixture and pour it into the fields. This will attract Hathor. She'll drink it, become drunk, and forget what she's doing and not destroy the rest of mankind. So the people did that. Hathor did not finish her job. She drank the mixture and didn't kill everyone. Well, Ra was still not happy because humanity still wasn't behaving the way that he really wanted him to. So Ra decided to leave. It's very important here. Ra, not the sun, but Ra, the nighttime sun, meaning Saturn, left. He went away. And the myth states that when Ra went away, the stars were born. And from that time forward, the people worshipped a new sun. So what this story, again, is telling us, is giving us historical evidence, eyewitness evidence, actually, that our planets were in a very different configuration of our solar system more than 12,000 years ago, and this catastrophe broke the orbit of the planets up. And as far as the time thing goes, Saturn being the father of time, it totally makes sense, because how do we today measure time? If you know anything about how we tell time by the stars. The actual official timekeeper is the Naval Observatory at Annapolis, Maryland. They actually get very specific and detailed about the actual time by shooting the stars, by looking at the stars and seeing where we are at in the heavens. So the whole mythology seems to agree with the geology and the evidence that we're looking at. So what I'm trying to do in the book, I'm trying to paint this picture of what really happened to take our paradise planet in the Golden Age and turn it into what it is now.
Well, and I think that when we look at ancient texts, you know, there were stories, there were metaphors, there were words used in slang, let's say, that we don't understand necessarily the meaning, or we don't understand the deeper symbolism that might be associated with it, that might be like an inside joke to them, or something that they understood. I mean, you know, if you say, you know, well, I'm trying to think of an example, but the only thing that can come to mind is Santa, but I don't even want to use that example. But, you know, but if you make a comment, you know, if you write some, well, actually, I ended up having this whole debate with somebody about proof. And I said, you know, thousands of years from now, they're going to find, you know, that we worshipped the gods of the Golden Arch and the female deity called Wendy. You know, because that's the symbols that we put out, but the relationship that we have to them are so different. And don't you find that that's part of the problem that we experience today?
It really is part of the problem, and I think the crux of the problem is that we simply don't know what they were thinking. But there is a psychologist. He's deceased now. He died in 97. There is a psychologist that's done some excellent work on trying to figure out what they were thinking. This guy's research, the man's name is Julian James, and he specializes in what he calls the bicameral mind. And in his book, Bicameral Mind, he does an analysis. He starts out with analysis of Homer's Iliad. And he demonstrates, from a literary perspective, that the gods, okay, or that the people, the men in the story, are never thinking. they're always in action. And that it is the gods who are directing the action. The whole idea of consciousness, of self-awareness, of self-reflection or consciousness, that really doesn't come about in literature until what we call the Greek miracle, when we have the great philosophers of the Greek tradition changing the whole approach to literature and communications and actually start writing and communicating like we do today. Okay? So going back to the mythologies in the bicameral mind, it makes total sense to me that our ancient ancestors did not know how to describe the act of cognition or the act of mentation. Okay? So they're using the concept of the gods to explain how they think. Now, what Julian Jaynes is saying is that their brains worked a little bit different back then. And there's good evidence today with people that are a little bit abnormal, that our ancient ancestors who had bicameral brains, they would actually hear a voice in their head. They didn't hear it all the time. Typically, Jaynes says, is that they would hear it when they're under stress. And to them, this voice was God or the gods. But in truth, it was their own faculty of cognition and mentation.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that comment. I mean, I do psychic work. You know, I talk to invisible people all the time. And, you know, could I call it God? Hell yeah, I could. I don't think that that's weird. And I don't think, you know what I mean? So,
well, what if, you know, I mean, we can get into a really long and drawn-out discussion on this. Because, you know, I agree with you there, and I do think that there are what I call thought forms, thought entities out there existing in a non-local realm that we can communicate with. So, you know, it's sometimes it's kind of hard to separate between our own mentation and what's coming from the non-local realm. Obviously, we do think, okay? And obviously, I think our ancients were capturing their thoughts in a lot of the ancient mythologies. But I'm not excluding the fact that there was external interjection and interaction on a non-local realm. So I do agree with you.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, because this is one of my fascinations in research, and I'd like to hear your take. And I'm going to kind of tie this with the Golden Age, because I have a question kind of around it. So during, you know, in deep antiquity, there was the worship of the serpent and the fertility god or goddess, whatever you know, whichever one you want to call it. Was that tied to the Golden Age? And do we find the disillusionment of the serpent as we move out of that period?
I do believe the serpent is attached to the Golden Age. In fact, my own research and ideas about that is when this catastrophe happened, the ground zero was actually the Great Lakes in North America. North America took the brunt of this devastation. Okay, the whole world was affected for sure, but ground zero was the Great Lakes. People on the other side of the world, especially Africa and Australia, weren't as affected. And this makes sense because if you look to where there's large animals still today, it's in Africa. That's where you have your largest animals. Africa is almost like a prehistoric zoo on a continent, where it doesn't exist in any other continents. But to get back to your question, the survivors out of Egypt rebuilt society. I believe this is where you get the pyramids being built. You get those granite structures, those granite temples being built. They had a technology that was sophisticated, that was very different than our technology. I believe the temple at Edfu has the story of the builder gods inscribed on its walls. These builder gods were actually people. They weren't gods per se to be worshipped, but they were actually survivors who restored civilization. So the Egyptian survivors who restored civilization, they did hand down their technology as well as their philosophy. Because wherever you find a high technical civilization, you also find a highly philosophical civilization. The problem is there's like a 6,000 or 7,000 year gap between the rebuilding of the civilization and the actual birth of civilization as we know it. So there's a dark time in there that we don't really know a whole lot about. What I see happening, and it would be the same thing today if we had a global catastrophe today, the survivors had the philosophy and the technology, and they would hand it down to their children and their grandchildren. However, in a desolate world that people are trying to survive, food and shelter become more important than anything else. So as the millenniums move forward to the Common Era, the actual technology of the ancient Golden Age is lost, but the philosophy is saved and moves forward. And this whole philosophy is what made Egypt so great. It's their idea of humanity and government made it possible for the Egyptian civilization to last 3,000 years. So, coming back to the serpent and the snake, in Egyptian philosophy, they used parts of nature to represent concepts and ideas and principles. Okay? And the snake, why the snake was so revered, why the serpent was an icon everywhere, why the pharaoh's diadem had a serpent and a vulture on it, has to do with deep human philosophy. Okay? The serpent is an animal that has a single body, but yet it has actually a forked tongue and a forked penis. So the serpent itself, the snake, is a symbol, a representation of an abstract concept of a movement from one to two. Schwaller called it the primordial schism. So the serpent actually represents the ultimate supreme God first move to create, that movement of there was one and then there was two. Okay? Now, the other part I want to tie into this is on the serpent's diadem is the vulture. You know, why don't they have a serpent? I mean, just thinking about this is kind of strange. When we look at it from a modern Western point of view, why would the ancient king of Egypt have a serpent and a vulture on his crown? It doesn't make a little sense. I explained the serpent idea, now for the vulture. The vulture was the goddess Mut, and she was feminine. She not only was she feminine, she represented the femininity of nature. That it is the female that nurtures life. It's from the female that there is birth. So that was their ultimate philosophy. It was part divine, God's movement of one to two, and the female being the nurturer of society. That's my take. You there?
Okay, yeah. I'm just kind of processing here a moment. Just Processing. See, I didn't know that Egyptian cosmology is very challenging for me to follow because it seems like it just kind of goes all over the place. And so I rely on people like you to go dig into it because I just don't have the patience for it. I'll look at anybody else's, but I really won't follow up Egyptian. I don't know why. It just...
Well, a general rule of thumb that I see in almost all of the Egyptian gods is the ancient Egyptians were looking at naturally occurring principles in nature and in humanity, okay? And they were finding symbols of nature to represent those concepts. Let's take one that a lot of people are familiar with, the god Thoth. I think Thoth is probably the most well-known ancient Egyptian god. Thoth is the god of wisdom. He created knowledge. He created writing. Thoth is represented by the head of a bird, the ibis bird. And this is really strange. Why would you have this stork-like bird representing wisdom? Well, the fact is, the ibis is a stork-like bird that lives in the Nile River, and it actually lives among the crocodiles. And at times, it'll actually roost on a crocodile's snout. When the crocodile opens its snout, it'll reach in and grab a fish or grab something out of the crocodile's mouth. It sounds crazy, but it actually exists in nature. Anyway, the ancient Egyptians saw this, observed this, understood this. Okay, so why the ibis bird represents wisdom is because the ibis bird itself, you've got to be wise to be able to live and exist among the crocodiles. Okay, so each Egyptian god, there's some deep philosophical reasoning that has everything to do with the natural world behind the concept they're trying to put forth.
Okay. Since we're talking about Egypt, one of the things that you go into detail with is, and it's one of my favorite biblical stories, so it was on my paper, so I want to get this question in, is you go into detail talking about the Exodus, like Moses. He's one of my favorite, biblical, historical, if you can call it that, characters. But the Exodus from Egypt, as portrayed in the Bible, but what did your research reveal? Because some of the material that you came up with seemed very, I don't want to say contradictory to mainstream, but definitely challenges what is out there in the mainstream. But but what I liked, and the reason I'm bringing it up, it wasn't that it was controversial, but I felt like you provided enough support to make me go,
Right.
It could happen. Because they don't freaking know anything.
No, they don't. There's some very large problems with Moses. There's actual literary problems with Moses in the Bible because he died, but then again wrote another book, which is kind of impossible. It's really hard to write about your death. He's attributed to writing the first 5 books of the Bible, but in that last book, he actually dies. So
he had a ghostwriter.
He had a ghostwriter. But there's larger literary problems than that because the whole idea of Moses, how he was born, he was born and he was put in a basket in the Nile River and found by a princess of the house of Pharaoh. Well, that story is nearly identical to the story of Sargon the Great going back to 2000 BC and the Great Akkadian Empire. The parallels are so close, and it's just the same thing with the story of the flood that's biblical. Its predecessor is actually the story of Gilgamesh from, again, 2500 BC. The biblical version of the flood is a very watered-down version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is like 20,000 words. Okay, and the Epic of Gilgamesh actually explains that the flood was actually celestial. You know, it was a celestial catastrophe, not necessarily a terrestrial catastrophe. So, to go back to your question about Moses and the Exodus, correct? Archaeological evidence does show that there were people leaving the northeast part of the Delta, moving to the east and the north. However, the archaeological evidence does not agree with the way the story is told in the Bible. There was a mass migration. The Exodus was actually a mass migration that took hundreds of years to accomplish. Okay, people were slowly moving out of Egypt to the kingdom of Israel. That's really what happened. But to get back to the literature part of it, what I believe the Hebrews did, and what, if there was a man named Moses, did, or the writer of those first 5 books anyway, what he was doing with the whole story of the Egyptian Exodus is he was using it as a metaphor to describe enlightenment, where you're in bondage in Egypt, and then you move into the desert where you're kind of lost and wandering, but your whole goal is to find paradise, which is the promised land. Okay, that's another way of describing the human condition. When we think about life, if we think about money and property and things, we are actually slaves to a physical system. And when the human person gets an idea of that's not right, there's got to be something else, your mind starts searching for truth. And you want to get away, you want to leave that bondage. So that's a mental decision to do that. But once you start searching for truth, you find yourself in this great big desert, trying to figure out what's what, what's real, what's not real. And then, if you push hard enough and stay on the journey, you will eventually come to the promised land, which is enlightenment, being one with God, being one with the universe, however you would like to describe that.
So you think it's more of a metaphorical journey and not a physical journey?
No, it's both. That physical journey did happen over 100 or 200 years. There actually were real people, real Hebrews leaving the Delta, migrating to the land of Canaan. But what I'm saying is that the writer of the book used that as a metaphor to get across the whole idea of God. If you look at the first 5 books of the Bible itself, if you look at it in a true historical context, it really seems to me that Moses, or the writer, whoever that was trying to forge the founding documents of a nation, the kingdom of Israel. That was the whole purpose behind that. So Moses was kind of mixing the whole spiritual end of life with an actual structure called the law. He was mixing them together to try and give the people a law to live by and a way of life.
Well, and laws he gave them, only 613. I mean, you read some of the, I think it's Leviticus, and where it's just like, it gets pretty anal. And then, then they have the laws that came from those laws, or the procedures that came from the laws that they have. And then they have the laws around those laws. And it's just like,
yeah, they have laws. You can work the laws in one law. It kind of sounds like our nation today a little bit, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. So I'm just kind of looking at the time, engaging where I can go with you. One of the things that I always think of when I think of the golden age is, and I'll stay with the Bible, the fall of man, and the whole thing, you have to be baptized so you can go to heaven. Let's just not even go there, right? Skip that part. But the whole concept of the fall of man and that we need to somehow come back to re-experience paradise. I mean, do you think that that's tied to this catastrophe that happened?
Most certainly is. Why the Hebrews really zero in on that little aspect there, I'm not quite sure. I think I'll be addressing that in my next book. But we people, when things really go bad for us, we have this natural urge to cry out to God. Why me? What did I do? Where did I go wrong? It's kind of natural for us to do that. So, whoever concocted this theology, many thousands of years ago, this fall of man, which is the removal of a paradise planet and the creation of a planet that's much more desolate, that's the fall of man, moving from the golden age to the age of scarcity. That's the fall. Why theologically it was boiling down a woman is a fascinating question. Here we're going back to the very first part of our conversation, hour and 45 minutes ago. Why the woman?
Because she had good hair. I don't know.
I really don't know for sure either. But I suspect, and this is where we have taken clues from our discussion about ancient Egypt, that the idea of feminine deity was revered. Okay, society was rather grouped around the female aspects of it, because the female aspect, she was mother, she was a nurturer. Those principles of the woman is what holds families together. It's what holds societies together. The ancient Egyptians understood this, and they went with it for a long time. But their culture lost out. The decline of Egypt was mostly because of foreigners coming in and a mixture of cultures. By the time the Roman Empire gets to conquer Egypt, there's really not a lot left of the true Egyptian culture. And then by the 6th century, with the Islamic invasion of North Africa and Egypt, the true ancient Egyptian way of life is totally demolished. But to get back to your question, the fall of man actually did happen. But again, it's a perspective of a writer writing about it at the time. And it seems to me only the Hebrews capture that. When you look
but don't they kind of capture that when they talk about the different Yuga cycles, and we go down to the Kali Yuga, which is where we're at now, where we're, supposedly so far away from our integrity or source or whatever you want to call it, that, moral turpitude is rampant.
That's true, but they don't single out the woman.
Well, this is true. This is true.
Okay. And the point I would like to make is it's this Judeo-Christian concept of the woman that has become dominant throughout the world over the past 5,000 years. And it's only started to let up within the last 100 years. So this is where I mentioned earlier in the broadcast where I was saying I'm starting to get into some spooky areas is, in my next book, I want to really find out, why was the woman singled out?
Well, maybe you need to write under a pen name and write it as a female author, and then they won't look at you so weird.
Well, I'm just going after some truth.
Let me ask you this question. I don't mean to interrupt, but let me ask you this question. So in Egypt, were they? It appears to me that it was a patriarchal society, and they were clearly not Judeo-Christian. Well, I mean, unless you consider that Christianity or Judaism came from Egypt versus Babylon.
Excuse me. No, Egypt only became patriarchal in the last 1,000 years or so of its existence. Its origins and its history and its philosophy is distinctly egalitarian, where the woman had rights. The woman could divorce. The woman could own property. The woman could do a lot of things. So this is where we get into the whole problem with 19th and 20th century history. When the first scientists went into Egypt and started doing the work, trying to put together the concept of ancient civilization, they naturally understood the pharaoh to be a male king, but that's not the case at all. The bloodline in ancient Egypt was passed by the female. Okay, that's where you get successive pharaohs, and to be more specific, the whole concept of pharaoh really didn't have much to do about being a single king. Pharaoh actually means the great house, and the great house was actually a body of rulers, not really just a single ruler. Of course, they had one person, and sometimes it was a female. There's been several females in ancient Egyptian history that actually, rose to that very top and was the head of that council. So the historians of the early 20th century, they always tried to put Western concepts onto ancient history, and it just really didn't work all that well. I mean, if you start looking at history for what it really is and start putting all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Okay, and then one last question, and then we'll talk about your book a little bit more, that kind of thing. But do you think we'll ever experience a golden age again, and not the faux golden age that you were referring to in the earlier part where, big business and, the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderbergs and whoever it is that want to create their own golden age. All right. Anyway, I was going to make a joke, but I'm going to be really good. But do you think we will experience, all of the people get to experience another golden age here on Earth?
I say yes. And I will drag in the number one physicist today to support that argument. Everyone probably knows his name that listens to a lot of these shows. He's Dr. Kaku. He's very popular. He does a lot of television. I was listening to him not long ago. I believe it was Art Bell's first broadcast from his new show. And he had Dr. Kaku on there. And Dr. Kaku was saying that we have the technology and the knowledge to take care of everyone on the planet right here, right now. And we are moving to a type 1, what he calls a type 1 civilization. We already have the communication system that's a type 1 communication system. Here we're talking about the internet. So we need to work out some problems with energy and with agriculture, and we have the knowledge to do it, and we will get there. But that takes time, and of course there's politics involved, so that's a huge problem there. My own my own personal beliefs on that is, unfortunately, people have to die. And I don't mean revolution. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. Albert Einstein said a long time ago, science progresses one funeral at a time. And I think that's the same thing with our society. We baby boomers are controlling everything right now. The whole baby boomer class is really in charge. And we have our own preconceived ideas and biases on what life should be like. And basically, we're really all about the money. And for our society to move forward, me and everyone in my age group a little bit older, we have to move on. And we have to let these younger people who are inheriting all these wonderful ideas that you and I talk about, they have to come up to speed, get in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and come to a place where they can really, truly start changing things. That's about 50 years away, maybe even 100 years away. But what's fascinating about that, being 50 to 100 years away, we're coming right into the true age of Aquarius on that.
We've been coming into the age of Aquarius since I was a kid. When are we ever going to get there?
That's correct, and that's a problem. I remember that song well back in the 60s. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. The problem is, the way the constellations are set, the way the constellation Pisces appears in the sky next to the constellation of Aquarius, there's no clear line of demarcation where Pisces ends and Aquarius begins. There's a fuzzy area there that's, if you talk to one astronomer, he's going to say it's 150 years away. Talk to another astronomer, he might say it's 75 years away. Talk to another one, he might say 50 years away. So it's not, it's not an absolute direct thing. But once we get far enough into the future, in where our planet is moving with all the other planets and constellations, if we get 200 years down the road, then it will be very obvious that on the spring equinox, the sun is rising in the constellation of Aquarius.
Well, see, I just think that's interesting, because they give our ancestors the ability to track the precession of the equinox with accuracy, but we can't do it now.
Yeah, well, that's science for you. Science. I have a love-hate relationship with science. On the one hand, I love it because science comes up with some really, really, really good data that you can use to make decisions about things and to create a philosophy. On the other hand, they're very obstinate about things. For example, talking about true origins, the origins of the universe, the origins of our planet, and of the life on our planet. Well, according to science, it's all an accident. Okay? The universe sprouted from nothing. Life on our planet sprouted from next to nothing. Well, how credible is that? If you look at it with pure common sense, it's absolutely idiotic to think that our universe came from nothing, or that our planet, all the wonderful life on our planet, actually came from nearly nothing. But the biggest point is that I'd like to make with that is science says everything's an accident. It's all random stuff just happening. Well, that is in defiance of the largest body of evidence there is on the face of the planet. And here I'm talking about the human condition. We human people have a natural drive to find purpose and meaning to our lives, to our society, and to our planet. So how can it be that we human beings, being so far as we know, the pinnacle of evolution, how can there be a complete accident? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, no. Especially since we stand out uniquely from anything else that lives on this planet.
Absolutely. And I still think that we are evolving. And I think we might even get to the place where the human condition can go into this golden age and we can live much longer, much happier lives. Kind of like the golden age, where you read about, and this is coming out of the Bible again, where you read about people living for 300, 400, 500, 600 years.
Okay, so you want to know, like, one of my new, I'll share this with you and the listeners, because I didn't put this part in the video, my new video that I just released on genetic engineering, so go to YouTube and watch it, everybody, is it seems as if that when we started consuming wheat, especially domesticated wheat, that people started experiencing health issues. And it makes me wonder if the domestication of wheat, which I didn't include in my article, it's in a different article, thank you very much, was why lifespans post-flood started to decline. Because now we were eating these genetically modified organisms that our body wasn't designed to eat, where in the golden age we were hunter-gatherers eating the fruits off the vine that weren't modified.
Actually, that is very so-called biblical, because if you look closely at Genesis 1 and 2, the whole concept of mankind itself is to eat the fruits from the land. And it's not till after the fall of man that man has to toil and eat animals and grains and breads and whatever to sustain it life. So, what you're saying is actually in agreement with the Bible. Now, I'm not really big on the Bible as a doctrine for theology. I'm just saying that the Bible was actually mythology that was capturing truths and putting them into a story. But what I think you could also throw in there is meat. If you go to any cardiologist's website, he's going to tell you or she's going to tell you that eating meat is not good for you. Okay? Eating mammalian meat is not good for you. We should be eating fruits, vegetables, fish, and fowl. And
okay, but Ed,
yes.
The big hook. I got 1 minute before the music comes up. So
okay.
If people want to get your book, get a hold of you, what's the deal?
If you want to get my book, you can buy it from Amazon.com, of course. You can also go to Barnes & Noble. They should have it. I don't know if all of them will have it, but they do carry my books. You can make them order it if you want. They can order it right away. You can go directly to my publisher site, InnerTraditions.com, and you can order it from there. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Facebook, Ed Malkowski. Send me a message, and I'll be glad to correspond with you.
Well, okay. Hey, Ed, this was so cool.
I know, it's always cool talking to you. You are my favorite radio show. This is my third time on here. I think we did an interview in 2008, in 10, and now this one. And by far, I really, truly enjoyed talking with you.
Yep, this is the third one. And I love having you on. And that's why when I saw that you had a new book coming out, I was like, I was trying to book you 6 months ago. They're like, it's not even done.
Yeah,
I'm like, oops. But I want him. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your information. And the book is great, and people need to get it and read it because, we kind of talked about a lot of stuff, and I think the book will actually put it maybe in a little bit better perspective than kind of the little snippets that they got listening today. But I hope they got enough to have them be interested in buying it.
Join host Dr. Reed Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com.
And I'm going to let you go. All right. That's Ed Malkowski. His book is Return of the Golden Age. ancient history and the key to our collective future. And then next week, we have Jonathan Goldman coming on in the first hour and Robbie Holt in the second hour. They're going to be talking about healing in the first hour, healing frequencies in the second hour, secrets of Aboriginal healing, which should be pretty interesting. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser